Okay, got it.
1 more minute. So if you don't mind, I just click on the record button. So we can start in exactly 8 p.m. now.
Yes, fantastic. And we have a cat as well. That's very nice. Feline participation.
A lovely cat doing conference.
Yes, strategically placed on the keyboard. So that's something cats will do.
So perhaps we can start now at 8 p.m. Is that okay, everyone?
Yes.
All set.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much, everyone, for attending the SFLIG conference. And we are so excited to welcome you to the last session of the conference, the Roundtable, which you are pioneers and world leaders in SFL for many generations. Professor Jonathan Wester and Professor Matthiessen, together with my co-convener, Dr. Erickson, and myself, Vinto. Please allow me to introduce Professor Matthiessen. Professor Matthiessen is a professor under the Maria Zambrano scheme, Computer University, distinguished professor in the Department of Linguistics, UIBE, and distinguished professor in the School of Foreign Languages, Yunnan University. He has a degree in linguistics from Lund University, where he also studied English, Arabic, and philosophy, and in linguistics from UCLI, MA and PhD, and has previously held position at USC Information Science Institute, Sydney University, Macquarie University, and the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. He has held visiting appointment at the University in Hamburg and the Brain Science Division of the American Institute in Tokyo. He is honorary professor by Beijing Normal University, Beijing, the Australian National University, Canberra, and guest professor, University of Science and Technology at Beijing. Professor Matthiessen has lectured and given courses around the world, including in China, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, India, Greece, Germany, Denmark, and the UK, Lebanon, Canada, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. And he is also involved in a number of international research networks. He has co-authored over 15 books and 170 book chapters and journal articles. With researchers around the world, he is working on how communication, aspect of educational linguistics, language description, registral cartography, multilingual study, language arts, and the language aspect and the development of systemic functional linguistic theory. And the more recent books are Systemic Functional Linguistics, Part 1, Systemic Functional Insight on Language and Linguistics. And in 2023, he has published Systemic Functional Linguistics, a complete guide by Routledge, and another book, System in Systemic Functional Linguistics, a system by theory of language. And another one, Theorizing and Applying Systemic Functional Linguistics Developments. And this book will provide an overview of some domains of his work. It's such an honor to have Professor Matthiessen with us today. And now it's over to my convener, Eric, to introduce Professor Wester.
Sure. So Professor Jonathan Webster is honorary professor at Macquarie University and professor at the City University of Hong Kong. He's retired recently. He was the director of the Halliday Center for Intelligent Applications of Language Studies from 2005 to 2021, and head of the Department of Chinese Translation and Linguistics at City University of Hong Kong from 2005 to 2011. Professor Jonathan Webster is the founding editor for Linguistics and Human Sciences, published by Equinox, and managing editor for Word. Professor Jonathan Webster is also the editor of 36 books on topics in systemic functional linguistics.
So, and you mentioned you already see Eric and I quite often during the conference, but please allow me to introduce my colleague here. It's such a pleasure to work with him, and he's such a brilliant colleague. Dr. Eric John is a senior lecturer in the Division of Languages and Communication, Hong Kong Polytechnic University College of Professional Continuing Education. He is the associate editor for linguistics and the human sciences, co-convener of this conference, of course, and co-editor of our current book, Applying SFL to Meet the Challenge of Change by Equinox.
Then, let's give her a warm round of applause for all her work. With great coordination, very enthusiastic and passionate scholar. So Dr. Vin To is a senior lecturer in English education at the University of Tasmania, Australia, and the leading organizer of the International Online Systemic Functional Linguistics Interest Group webinars and conferences from SFLIG 2020 to this conference, SFLIG 2023. He's the co-editor of Systemic Functional Linguistics Theory and Application in Global Context by the University of Tasmania 2023, co-author of Theoretical Perspectives on Cultural Representations in Vietnamese Children's Picture Books, which is recently published by Cambridge Scholars, and co-editor of Applying SFL to Meet the Challenge of Change by Equinox. She's also the guest editor for Linguistics and the Human Sciences. So Vin, how are we going to hold the roundtable?
Well, thank you very much, Eric, for that nice introduction. And now I think it's over to Jonathan to introduce his forthcoming book and the relations to and which include a chapter that Professor Jonathan Christian contributed, and how that relates to the theme of the roundtable today. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, when we were discussing about the roundtable and what should be the theme and what we should be talking about, because Christian recently contributed a really wonderful chapter to a new edition of the Bloomsbury Companion. I think now they've changed the name to Handbook to SFL. It was previously published in 2009. And Christian also had a chapter in that volume on new directions. He's now, I wouldn't say he's updated the chapter. That would be to minimize the contribution that he is making through this chapter in this volume. And it sets out very clearly a roadmap for how SFL, where it's come from and where it can be going. And it was out of that chapter because the book has not come out yet. It's still being finalized. And fortunately, as one of the editors, I have the opportunity to have seen this chapter and to have been able to enjoy it. Now, in that chapter, there was a particular statement that Christian made, and it was that SFL is metastable in the sense that it remains stable by changing ongoingly in exchange with its environment. So SFL is, if I were to paraphrase Darwin, it would be that SFL has been and is being evolved even as we speak, even as we are talking through this conference, as we are engaging with one another, and of course, through major contributions like Christian's in this particular volume. It's the idea that our theory must evolve. It must be able to meet the challenges of change, and that is a theme of this conference. And it's this realization that has kept SFL relevant Other theories have gone by the wayside. I remember when I began the editing Professor Halliday's collected works. At the time, the dean of my faculty said, "Don't do it. It's not worthwhile." He wrote some of these 50 years ago. That's what really impressed me, though, that what Professor Halliday had been writing 50-some years ago and from then on really laid out the foundation of not just an applicable linguistics, but a linguistics with staying power that has not simply expired, but has really gone on to develop. And the true test of a theory is its success in problem solving for society's sake. Not like some theories which are just about determining the grammaticality of an utterance. Our theories about language and semiosis are shaped by our experience of language, working with language, and realized through interaction. So SFL has continued to develop. It's developed beyond Halliday's original formulation, certainly. That has been the foundation, though. The foundation for applicable principles of language as a social semiotic. And this is what has given SFL that lasting ability to deliver valuable insights into how we understand how language works to make meaning. You know, there's another, recently I was looking at Halliday's discussion about language evolving. And I mentioned it in the lecture that I gave earlier today. But there's a line in there in which Halliday is talking about, well, his sort of Marxist orientation. And he was talking about, in this case, capitalism. And he was saying that the structures of capitalism began as enabling, but then became constraining. And I think it's important for us to maybe apply that to our linguistics and to SFL. What is there has been enabling. It has enabled us to look at language in terms of ideational, interpersonal, textual meaning. We know about what is transitivity structure and all these things, and that has been very enabling. But if we stop there, it becomes constraining. We don't look beyond it. We don't see how else language makes meaning. And that, to me, I think is critical aspect of going forward. So I really would like you to have the opportunity to hear from Christian. There is so much that will be in that chapter in the volume. I hope he will share some of that insight with us today. So I'm going to pose that over to Christian and ask that if you would talk about what was in that chapter and this idea about how SFL can continue to develop.
Yes, great, thank you. And I'm delighted that this 29 companion will be reincarnated as a Bloomsbury handbook. It seems very appropriate under your leadership and bringing in other editors. I do think, as you say, just to echo what you said, it is quite remarkable. If you look at the scene of linguistics in the 1960s, there were a number of strands around, a number of traditions, theories, and they were, of course, proliferated during the 70s, 80s, when the notion was that every linguist worth his or her salt had to have their own theory, which is what lasted for a while. It was a curious effect of the increasing dominance of Chomsky linguistics. But if you look at the strands there, of course, some version of Chomsky linguistics is still around. I wouldn't say that it is expanding or generating significant new questions or ideas. It still has its very limited set of research questions really coming out of Western philosophy, epistemology, about the source and nature of knowledge. If you look around, I think systemic functional linguistics is one of the few strands still around. Others, of course, have led into new developments, like Sid Lamb's stratificational linguistics, now relational network theory. But as you said, Jonathan, I think it is from the beginning, because from the beginning, systemic functional linguistics had a very different model of doing linguistics. So as a meta language, it was very much more like language. Now, among other things, language is, of course, metastable, and one aspect of that is precisely the constant adaptation to the changing environment. But of course, that is a dialogic or dialectic process. So language also contributes to that. As far as SFL is concerned, there is a kind, I think, balance between being reactive and proactive. So there are areas, I think, where SFL has been proactive, in part, but not only, because in a sense, in the 1960s through the 70s, because of the increasing dominance of Chomsky and the Chomskyan conception of language, but also linguistics, Halliday was, together with colleagues, sort of pushed to the periphery. So that, I think, magnifies a sense that he was ahead of his time. So I think the 21st century is much more of a Hallidayan century than the 20th century, even though in very important ideas came out of work, a lot of it empirical work, in the 20th century. And if you survey the field, I think there are a number of features of SFL that were not picked up in the 60s, 70s, or even regarded as bizarre, like the conception of language as a probabilistic system, for example. Now with neuroscientists like Patricia Kuhl emphasizing the importance of statistical learning in early language learning, for example, the conception of grammar and vocabulary not as separate books, the sort of folk model, but as a continuous resource of lexicogrammar, resource of wording, organized paradigmatically from a grammatical zone to lexical zone. Well, more and more people accept that now. Halliday's early observation that the division between syntax and morphology, this is language dependent, it's not part of the general theory, and more people have been started to talk about morphosyntax. So one could certainly cite a number of examples like this that have to do, in a sense, some sense, with the core of linguistics. But beyond that, I think the expansionist model in SFL, in the sense of taking on new territories, like semiotic systems other than language, taking on new problems, as you said, Jonathan, that's been very, very important. And as part of that, the ongoing dialogue with members, representatives of other disciplines, professionals, but also members of the community. So it's been a very, very different model of development. If you then look externally, I think this is actually much more resonant with developments in universities in general, but also in communities, the communities in which universities are embedded in the 21st century. So in the 60s, it was dirty to get involved in applications if you were in linguistics. Now, there is much more awareness of the importance of applications. And we could say that there is a general movement maybe to draw on Michael Halliday's conception of linguistics as applicable linguistics, applicable science. So an attempt to overcome this bridge between theoretical and applied science. There are various manifestations of this. I think discussions of knowledge transfer from universities to communities, for example, funding for more applied research with applications, and also, at least in some corners of the academic world, the emphasis on impact, on positive impact statements, like in the UK and Hong Kong. Now, I think this is a nicer environment for SFL because it means it's resonant with the expectations Now, of course, there are also dangers here, having to do with control of funding, academic positions, and so on. But if you look more broadly at scientific developments, I mentioned probabilistic theories, for example, the increasing interest in new versions of systems thinking, of, say, Barabasi's notion of network science, all these, I think, resonate with what was part of SFL really since the 1960s. Now, if we think of one aspect of language as being metastable, it is that language is, or any one language is, an aggregate of the registers. Now, languages continue, they're stable. Registers may evolve and they may disappear. And the same, I think, is true of SFL. So there would be, as it were, meta-registers. I mean, the activities within SFL in different contexts of use that emerge, and maybe they disappear. But overall, the meta-registral composition of activities and people involved in SFL continues to expand. So we could cite recent developments. I mean, not so recent, but one is healthcare communication studies, for example. Ecolinguistics would be another important area. And I think we can cite a number of these, and we can look ahead to see what is likely to be needed in the second half of the 2020s, for example. So I think that's very, very interesting and important. And so I think it encourages us to continue to look across disciplines and see where we find other good practices, where we find possible dialogue partners. And again, other examples may come up during the roundtable, because we are talking about challenges and we're talking about the way head into the future. We could also talk about possible threats. In some sense, they always combined, I think, because incredibly developments as the growth of community world, which is different educational systems and so on, that is tremendous. And that means have much more of a collective brain now than ever before in time. But of course, we have to tend to the possibility of regionalism, meaning splintering apart and so on. So I think this virtual conference is one of the many opportunities precisely, and the organization of the Systemic Functional Linguistics Interest Group to ensure that that doesn't happen. So I think we have reason to be positive. Let me stop at that point for others to come in and comment.
One interesting response, Christian, you're saying about how people are sort of coming to recognize Halliday's contribution, which perhaps before they were not paying attention. I recently was asked to write an entry on Halliday, Michael Halliday, for the Handbook of Pragmatics. And I think it's really important for us to reach out to other disciplines. Now, I wouldn't say other disciplines, of course, but other schools of thought within linguistics. Now, there was something I did want to ask you about, and that was a few days ago, Christian and I were both attending a conference in China, in Zhuhai, and I heard Christian speak. Christian, you were talking about positive and sort of negative factors that
yes,
sort of impinging on SFL. Could you say something about that here?
Sure. Yes, and we were both at a conference hosted materially at Sun Yat-sen University, but also with online participation, where this came up. Yes, a number of years ago, I suggested that maybe it was part of the disease of being part of the administration. Incidentally, Jonathan, hooray if you stood up to the dean and ignored his or her advice. I think that's very important. One has to be brave to do that. And now, so I did a SWOT analysis, SWOT analysis is often used in management context, and I just systematize it. So S stands for strengths, W for weaknesses, O for opportunities, and T for threats. And I set this up as two simultaneous systems. One is positive, negative. Okay, so positive is strengths and opportunities, and negative weaknesses and threats. And the other system is having to do with location of these. So internal to SFL, or possibly, no, SFL, and then external to SFL, within linguistics, broadly speaking, or within the academic disciplinary spectrum, or within the community. And then one can discuss combinations of these one by one. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, let me say a little bit about this. So maybe I'll start externally, because that, I think, connects with what we were talking about before. So I think threats, they include broad ones we're all familiar with. The difficulty of getting funding for research, the constraints on academic positions, the increasing love affair with metrics, I mean, with measuring things. And as I've often said, universities or the societies they're part of like to measure things, but they measure things that are easy to measure,
Right.
not surprisingly, and things that are easy to measure are typically fairly trivial. So one threat, I think, is, and that affects not just SFL, is the move towards assembly line publication. Now, if you look at Michael Halliday's publications, for example, many of the articles or chapters are really condensed books, because he had time to metabolize, to think about this. He didn't have to produce 2 journal articles per year or whatever it might be, right? Incidentally, if you look at the, the contributions by major scholars broadly in our area in the 20th century first half, like J.R. Firth, and we could also say Wittgenstein, they wouldn't have gotten tenure. They would be out of the system, right? So that is a threat that affects many of us. And then the assembly line publishing that we sort of invited to produce articles or chapters. Well, mostly should be articles from star journals with very little content, because that's how you extend. So I think that's a general threat. If you look within the academic community, I think one ongoing threat is, even though Michael Halliday was ahead of his time, and linguists now discover or rediscover insights that he had earlier, they don't refer to him, or they don't refer to SFL. So, for example, I mentioned the probabilistic conception of language, which he developed in the 1950s, right? There was a book published in 2003, Probabilistic Linguistics, with a number of chapters. There's no mention of Michael Halliday's probabilistic conception of language, including, crucially, the paradigmatic basis of it, which makes a big difference. There's one mention of Michael Halliday, and that's the reference to the description of English in IFT. So I could cite many more examples, but that's a kind of threat. So we need to find ways of dealing with this. Right. But if we then move from threats to opportunities, we're positive. So there is an opportunity for opening up new dialogues, including, I think, importantly, dialogues with other disciplines. I mentioned, for example, network science, Barabasi, for example, but also the work on advanced work on language and the brain. There is a group in Argentina with Adolfo Garcia and a team working towards neurosemiotics. So this is a very interesting opportunity, right? And there is already some dialogue, so that's very important. But there are many other areas, I think, where we could deal with this. In cognitive science, finally, they're picking up aspects of thinking about language that were not part of the mainstream from the 50s up through the 80s, at least. That cognition is embodied, right? That cognition is dialogic, that consciousness is collective, that language plays a major role, not only in our conception, but also in perception. So again, this is fantastic. And to turn this into opportunity, we find ways of dialoguing with them and bringing their attention to what's going on at SFL. So I think there are very interesting opportunities here, definitely, including new areas of application. Now, weaknesses in SFL, so I'm now turning to internal, again starting with negative and then go to positive. I think these weaknesses are not necessarily inherent, but there's an aspect of developments, positive development. So I talked about regionalization. So one possible weakness is the lack of an international perspective beyond regions. And some places are more nationalistic than other places. So I think that is something we have to be very careful with. I mentioned the importance of SFLIG here and WASFLIG in West Africa and so such initiatives. But I think this is something we have to keep working at to ensure that it's not a weakness, but actually turns into a strength. Also specialization. So I talked about the makeup of SFL as a meta language of meta registers. And these have continued to be added and expanded over 60 years or so, but which is very positive, tremendously important, and with new interfaces, dialogic interfaces, right? But the potential weakness here is the usual one in science, specialization, so fragmentation of knowledge. Now, interestingly, the quantum physicist David Bohm talked about this about over 40 years in a book, sort of popular science book, Wholeness and Implicate Order. But he talked about the danger of fragmentation of knowledge. Now, that was in physics, quantum physics. And you see this in conferences, of course, different strands. So I think one way of dealing with this is we try to develop, if we have a particular area of interest, we try to dialogue with people in other areas where we think there is an important opportunity. I'm struck, for example, by the potential for resonance and synergy between the education linguistic work and more computational modeling, say, for example, of knowledge domains, potentially develop tools, could be learners' workbenches for this. So if I then gently slide into strengths, I think one strength is precisely that systemic functional theory is holistic. So it's not a special purpose theory, it's holistic theory of language in context, systemic functional linguists turn languages in their context of culture. The aim is always comprehensive descriptions. So comprehensiveness just to answer questions about universals and so on, but really to do right by the language, as it were. And the combination of holistic theory and comprehensive descriptions, I think, very much
Have we frozen or?
No, it's just Christian. Yeah. His internet connection may not be as stable as we are.
We lost him. He frozen this way.
So why don't we go forward a little bit and ask some questions? To ask Jonathan some questions that we can share. I would like to go back to the question about metastability, because Christian just mentioned that in general.
Apologies.
Oh, welcome.
It wasn't Spanish censorship at work. At least I don't think so. A local network problem.
Yeah, fill all the time. Yeah. So back to you, Christian.
Okay, so I was just saying, I think before I was so rudely interrupted by the network here, the combination of holistic theory, and that includes locating the theory of semiotic systems in an ordered typology of other systems, and the goal of comprehensive descriptions, as I put it, to do right by each language that we engage with. These are important ingredients in applicable linguistics. So they're part of the sort of expanding possibility of answering questions that come up in other disciplines in the community and so on. So I think this is strength. And we continue with these strengths, right? And I think one thing we can do is highlight the value of the development of new descriptions. Ones that expand existing descriptions, say, of Chinese, Japanese, English, and so on, but also of new languages, including small community languages, because that can have a very significant impact, say, for example, in early schooling in the communities, right? So when we think about the strengths, I think, then we do this in relation to the potential weaknesses. So that's the kind of thinking. It's, I think, systemic thinking in the sense that we don't treat each as isolated, but as part of a sort of a region in an overall space. Or we think about the valeur of each combination.
Christian, if I may, I remember when you were presenting this in Zhuhai, one of the points that, and I was on the screen, you were showing the chart and so forth, and one of the points on, correct me if I'm wrong, under the sort of weaknesses area, more negative, was eclecticism, and I'm not quite sure why you put it in that category.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. That's a point of view. If you look at it from within SFL, as it were, and we consider what our colleagues do, if they engage in eclecticism, that's a weakness, potentially. This is certainly arguable. If you look at it from our side, I think it's a threat, meaning the tendency in various traditions to put together some kind of framework to address. I take a bit of SFL, for example, a bit of speech act theory or conversational analysis. So it may be, conversation analysis and descriptions of appraisal, for example. Now this seems to be quite valued, looked upon benignly by many people. To me, the result of eclecticism runs the danger of being a Frankenstein's monster, meaning you have these parts that don't fit together. And because they don't fit together, it's very hard to reason about them systemically. Whereas if you have everything within one holistic framework and a comprehensive description, it's easier. But of course, that's individual choice. There are different options. Now, if you have appraisal and system functional account of speech function, exchange, and so on, we know how they fit together. But if you take that together with conversation analysis, it seems to me they're very odd. They're an odd couple because they're very different. Conversation analysis is sort of analysis of conversation as interactive behavior, not surprisingly, because it comes from sociology, right? Whereas speech functional accounts of systemic functional accounts of speech function, these are based on a conception of conversation, exchange of meanings, and there's very different. Plus details like taking intonation seriously, and so on. That's the kind of but I take your point that you could look at eclecticism from different vantage points, right?
But and your meaning is not at all in the sense that we're not to engage with other schools of thought and so forth. That's not your point. That's not what you're referring to.
Thank you for the clarification. Yeah.
Because you just have been saying that in the sense that we do need to engage. We do need to reach out to give the insight from SFL into other schools which may not be aware of Halliday's contribution, the contribution of SFL, the discipline, right? Not only from Halliday, but from yourself and from those who are engaged in developing the theory. So I appreciate
the whole community,
that clarification. Yeah.
Yes. I think, early on, meaning 40 years ago or more, I naively thought this was a matter of field, meaning if you share a domain, subject matter, and so on, no matter where people come from, academics come from, they would be interested. And it took me a while to realize how naive I was. Much more important is tenor in the academic world. Tenor networks, of course, communities of people who talk to one another, but then also very importantly, so that's a matter of you could say familiarity and so on, but then also very importantly, power or status. There is a fairly recent article last couple of years or so by Jeff Pullum about Chomsky's reference practices. Now, Chomsky may be an extreme example, and Jeff Pullum is hardly your catalyst linguist. He can be very acerbic. But his analysis is, Chomsky's way of dealing with people with other opinions is this: if they're not visible, he'll just ignore them. So there's no need to engage with them. There's no need to sort of highlight their contributions. If they're visible, he will then downgrade them using the resource of appraisal. He will dismiss them in different ways. Now, as I said, this is an extreme example, but I think it's interesting to be aware of this. Right. Of course, I don't think because of the people the community of people, Michael Halliday, but also many others, is an entirely different approach to how you work as an academic, research student, and so on, what community means, and so on. It's a very different approach, and I think that is indeed one of our strengths. Is a caring community. It's a community where people support one another. If a colleague presents, they're not attacked. Right? If they have, we've managed to have fairly wide range of ideas for a long period of time, without anything even remotely resembling the so-called linguistic wars within generative linguistics of the late 60s into the 70s. So indeed, I think this is very important in thinking about dialogue. Now, in my experience, I don't know, Jonathan, what do you think? In my experience, it's often easier to dialogue with people from other disciplines than linguistics, right. Because they will be more open. I mean, you've done a lot of dialoguing. Is this also something that resonates with your experience?
No, I absolutely. And what's so interesting is when you see the overlap between what's being developed in other disciplines and what is going on in SFL. And I refer back to the Russell Mears from University of Sydney, psychiatry, and he developed this technique for dealing with patients, his conversational model. But in his writings, it was so interesting to me to see how what he was saying about language, text, metaphor, was so much in line with what Halliday was saying. And here they were coming, not because they had been talking together, but because their insights were really born out of their experience. Russell Mears with working with patients and so forth, and Professor Halliday with language, and the whole, that really was like one of these sort of eureka moments when you realize that what is being done in one corner is also being realized in another corner. And that's when you appreciate the dialogue, because then you realize that there is a sense in which we are sharing an insight. And that to me is really significant. And it broadens our understanding of what we're doing. And it doesn't have just a significance to language and linguistics, but also outside our discipline. But you're right. It's so true that others within linguistics, within other schools of thought and so forth, especially the formal linguists and so forth, they don't want to hear anything about what is what Halliday said, what Christian Matthiessen said. You know, it's and that's sad, because it just doesn't what they're missing out on. And so we must take every opportunity. As was mentioned, I'm the managing editor of Word. Now, Word is one of these journals that's general linguistics. It reaches out to an audience that is not just SFL, but quite a broad spectrum of people working in different schools of thought and with different languages. And that's where I think it's so important for, and I would encourage the scholars that are here to contribute to that journal and be able to make their voice heard. And so others can see that insight. And certainly Word is SFL friendly and very willing to be publishing findings from SFL. And I just would, I mean, Halliday's, I've said it before, Halliday's first journal paper was in Word. Lebov's first journal paper was in Word. Yemslev's Stratification of Language was in Word. I mean, the list goes on. And so we need to be a part of that. What should I say? We need to be a part of that, reaching out to an audience that is wider and making people appreciate what SFL has to offer. So it's I'm really, Christian, you have had such a important influence on the development of SFL. And I'm always thankful to see how you have broadened your scope of coverage to include so many countries and so many scholars. And it really has, you are doing so much for SFL and are contributing so much in terms of insights, in terms of being able to create those channels of information and so forth. And I want to take this opportunity to say that and express my great appreciation for the role that you play in SFL.
Hello.
Well, thank you very much.
Hello, Christian.
I just want to say, if I had a mirror, I would hold it up, because I think this applies so much to you too, and it's a collective, collaborative opportunity. Yes, but Demogan, you have a point, so please come in.
Yes, Christian, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I observed that in SFL, we hardly use the word syntax, which is basically Chomsky. And you have mentioned something about holisticity, where SFL can be, reach onto other fields or school of thoughts, as Jonathan said. I've not seen SFL scholars looking into syntax or talking about syntax in SFL. And I think that there's that possibility that we blend Chomsky's work with Halliday's work. And I think I've read a book like that in England. Maybe is it not Lemke or Lamb who tried to do that? I don't know why we don't have that in SFL. Thank you.
Well, I think part of it is terminological. And there are different senses of syntax, of course. There is the one that comes through in the sort of Bloomfield American structuralist tradition onto Chomsky. There is also the sense with Morris in a sort of, in the establishment, one of the attempts to establish pragmatics, which came up, with syntax and semantics and pragmatics. I think as far as SFL is concerned, it's because it tends to be covered in discussions of grammar or lexicogrammar. So the distinction, I mean, the distinction between syntax and morphology goes back to traditional grammar in the West, of course, between syntax and accidents. But one of Michael Heller's early points, having worked on Chinese, for example, but also being part of the Firthian tradition, which was, the splendors of different languages, there's very much part in that tradition, that the distinction between syntax and morphology may arise in the description of particular languages. It wasn't part of the theory. The theory was one of grammar with the rank scale and the kind of delicacy from grammar to lexis. And I think that opens up the way for seeing the relationship between what is traditionally syntax and morphology in different ways. And I think that is also reflected in, typologists using the term morphosyntax to make the point that syntax and morphology are not necessarily sort of modular distinctions. But I think looking at systemic functional descriptions of different languages, you certainly find that people deal with syntax, and they may use a term, but then there is a sort of tendency, I think, a sort of rank-based terminology to talk about clause grammar, group grammar, or group phrase grammar, word grammar, and so on.
Thank you very much for the insights, Professor Matthiessen. And it looked like, and thank you for the question topic. And it looked like Eric had a question earlier. Would you like to go ahead asking your question now, Eric?
I think I would like to change the question because
I have so many questions, Joe.
We're always about changes, right? So let's see how you are dealing with it. So thank you so much, Christian, for talking about the SWOT analysis about the internal and external pressures that we have as SFL scholars. And aside from regionalization, as well as the kind of perhaps the potential lack of perspectives from different international or cross-discipline kind of collaborations or perspectives, I must say, maybe Lockie will resonate with me that we have our local constraints too. So when you say tenor is very important in the academic world, especially in the notion of, or in terms of like power play or the power of status, as like young scholars or young teacher researchers like myself find it very hard to introduce SFL to the larger teaching community. But anyway, I would like to ask for both Christian and Jonathan's advice on what we should do as future SFL scholars. So should we converge, narrowing down one or two areas, or should we diverge? So thank you.
Can I just ask Eric,
Yeah.
what do you mean by focus on few areas, or what do you have in mind?
For example, I have been working on appraisal and the use of appraisal for analyzing academic writing or academic literacy support. So I remember one colleague reminded me that out there are lots of scholars doing the same thing. So how would you want to be remembered as a scholar when your name is searched on Google Scholar? So I was kind of at a loss because I thought I was just doing what I am interested in and what I am good at doing. And I didn't think so much about, all those, what Christian said about metrics, impact factor, and, publishing in star journals. So from time to time, I've been pulled away from my original research areas and do different things. And I find myself getting more lost and lost. So I was thinking about going back to my, I can't say it's my expertise, or maybe you think this is, but yeah, I'm just thinking about going back to doing more appraisal. So how do we strike a balance as like emerging SFL scholars? So by converge, we mean we don't care so much about metrics right now, and try to build a portfolio by metabolizing, using Christian's term, to build our strength, or should we start thinking about doing different things at the same time and see what fits into our profile and develop that area, or those areas? That is what I meant by diverging.
I'll just go first, and that Christian, you can come in. But my feeling would be you have to adapt. You have to be able to not be stuck in a particular sort of approach to how and what you're going to study, but be able to adapt to the needs that you see around you. As young scholars, unfortunately, you do have to sort of pay attention to the metrics that are there. It's important for you to advance in your career. You will make choices at some point that, as I mentioned, when my dean told me, don't do the collected works of Halliday. And he said there'll be no promotion in that. There will be nothing. You will come out with nothing. And I felt, no, this is important. This is what I need to do. And it's important to put the collected works together and to make that more accessible to the wider community. And so sometimes I'm going to have to sort of go back at what I said, and you're going to have to stand up to what you think and what you feel is important for you to do. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's no immediate promotion in that. Yeah. But if it's really good what you do, and if the scholarship is there, and because the insights are obtained, mm-hmm. then there will be no holding you back. So I think it's not so much follow your heart, but it is follow what you believe to be the not just what's interesting, but what will be significant in sure. terms of the insights and findings that you'll gain. Sure. Christian, what would you say?
Well, I think it's a very important question. I feel that we could have a whole, panel roundtable discussion. I think it's very timely to try to bring together ideas and experiences and so on. I think, Jonathan, you and I, we belong to a generation where we didn't have to worry about this. And so this was a blessing, not one in disguise, but it was really fantastic. And we were able to do what you say you're doing or have been doing, Eric, sort of follow our interests. So I think you have to have different time frames trying to develop. One challenge is always going from the doctoral thesis, the PhD, to life after that. I often say to my doctoral students, it's good to have a hobby. When you think about doing a PhD or, doctoral research project, you often consider a number of possibilities, and you have to choose which one is most effective at the time. And they have to do with various factors, including availability of advisors, supervisors, and so on. But I think even during that time, it's good to nurture other interests and to think about the immediate time frame where you have to deliver. Say you under contract, a 3-year contract, you want to make sure it will be renewed. And when that's renewed, then maybe you can go to something like regular terms or tenure or whatever, right? But also to maintain increasing employability, because often the best way of getting promotion is, strangely enough, in a sense, to move to another institution. It's more difficult to be promoted within one's own institution than to get a new job at a higher rank. It seems to me a bit silly, but that's to put it in mind where it is. So I think these different time frames, the sense that you have hobbies, are important. And again, sort of maybe systems thinking, you want to develop an approach that is, as it were, fault tolerant, that can cope with risk. So if some area doesn't work out, you still have other things going on. It's not easy, obviously. One way is to develop collaborations with people whose work will strengthen yours. You will have synergy, some more than the parts, but who are not in direct competition. So it may be because there are other disciplines, other institutions, and so on. I think that's important. So I think in SFL we're trying to do more in terms of collaborative networks. I mean, not ones that are funded, because that's a lot of overhead, but collaborative networks. So I think we can do more in terms of working together to produce research, publications, applications that would not otherwise happen. Right. And that has to do in part, of course, with different regions and so on. And in some sense, the silver lining of the horrible COVID years is we're much better at this now because we had to. So if we can develop that, is, I think, very, very valuable. I think we out of time, but I one example, your colleague Lockie, Lockie, you've done this very interestingly and successfully because your PhD research was very interesting and important in its own right, the examination of creativity. But you had, I mean, I'm not saying it's just these two, but you had another major interest, which we could, falls within ecolinguistics. And so pursuing these at the same time. Now, so you sort of think about how can I go from here? So if you're interested in appraisal, for example, it might be developing a description of another language, or it might be linking it in with tenor work, or it might be, could I suggest, to treat the descriptions around of appraisal not as semantic, but as, at least of attitude, but to think of them as interpersonal lexis largely. And then when you think about as appraisal semantically, make it much more strategic. That would be an interesting opportunity. Making it more strategic would include, I think, looking at the variation in appraisal strategies in different registers, different functional varieties of language. So how do we appraise a colleague at a workplace who's not part of the in-group? How does a reviewer of a research proposal anonymously appraise a proposal, and so on and so forth? So to push appraisal towards a more strategic position where you take in more than interpersonal connotation in lexis. So there are many possibilities. But again, it seems to me it would be very valuable, and I appeal to SFLIG as a possible venue for this, to explore this more systematically, because it's a huge issue. Now, just one final observation. If you look at all the years of sort of challenges to SFL, one interesting observation, I mean, you all know this, but it's still interesting, is it survived not by being located in linguistics only, but by being spread across different disciplines, faculties, and indeed also having professional context. So I think this is also something that we can perhaps learn more from and think as we think ahead. Thank you. Good luck.
There is no better advice. Yeah, advice from two pillars.
Thank you very much, Christine and Jonathan, for your invaluable advice. And may I ask some talk here? Because I can relay myself to Eric's questions, and perhaps we are peers, right? So I would like to share some thought as well. I think I'm also a young scholar like Eric and many of you here. So I think it's really important for us to work from our strength and from what we are good at, and see how that's aligned with our university research strategies or requirements. For example, I chair a really interesting session this earlier today in the morning And the scholars do use pressure, Eric, to analyze the use of the language of unique coordinator in an environment. So, for example, we are good at appraisal and analytical frameworks using SFL, and we can see how we can use that to make a positive impact or positive contribution, or to produce, to improve student outcome. For example, we look at how student writing can be improved, how to raise problem related to literacy outcome in low socio-economic area. I think that was a very important issue in our society, and we can always make a positive contribution using what we are good at. For example, I think SFL offer a really a powerful analytical framework. There always way for us to see how we can apply this theory and the analysis to understanding the issue around us and how to make a positive contribution. And I think it's always aligned because literacy is such an important area, and it's also always aligned to the university research strategy. Especially at my university, literacy is always a priority. So I feel myself, my research strength align with the university priorities in literacy. And there's always room for me to explore further how to use SFL in my work, current and future work. So I hope we can share something, and that can share, that can I hope that can answer some of the questions that you raised.
Actually, can I say something too? Because you all have mentioned my name. Yeah. Well, actually, I actually do think Eric knows the answer. He just want to ask that question to bring up a topic of discussion. I actually do think he already know the answer. Also, Margot in the chat had a very good summary. Right, Margot said, "Well, follow your inner voice while continuously adapting to the ever-evolving environment." And that's just a really good summary of Christian's and Jonathan's point there. But I think there's one thing that maybe our prestigious scholars have not yet maybe touched on or mentioned, and because that they are very humble and so they don't mention it. But I think I should bring that up since I'm not a distinguished scholar. So I think that point is really really important about research. It's that people, maybe young scholars like us, want to know what's the secret formula for becoming famous or to be remembered by somebody for a certain strand of research, right? Because we want that winning formula. We want to know that secret. But like nobody really asked the Christians or Professor Webster like how they actually managed to become the famous scholars they are right now. And I think that the really real formula or the tip or the only way is to really keep doing it. It's like they've been researching for years and years and years. So they're successful because they keep going and going and going and going, never stopped, right? Never give up, never stopped. And it's not really like, going diverse or converging or anything. It's just like, well, you just keep going, basically. Like successes don't come in a single year or 2 years or 3 years. And this is something I learned from watching a video on interviewing one of the Hong Kong's YouTubers who has worked for a decade to achieve like 1 million YouTube subscribers. And people were asking him like, how do you do it? He was like, well, I basically work for 10 years. That's how I do it. There is no secret formula. Yeah, just that, I think. Yeah. So because I really think that's the only way. Thank you.
Thanks, looking for your thoughts. Any further thoughts, everyone?
Yeah, thank you, Christian and Jonathan, for your insightful contribution. Adding to what Law said, I think another issue is about mentorship. If you look at Christian, for example, he was under holiday for some time, understudying him, and he was able to write something tangible about him. But if you look at nowadays, no younger scholar is willing or ready to stay under tutelage to be taught by anybody. So with that, I don't think you can achieve greatness without understanding or without learning, without reading. So that shows the importance of hard work, diligence, and determination. And Rome was not built in a day. Before, when you look at Google Scholar citation, maybe before when you started, you're having one Google Scholar citation, and then you look at somebody who's having about 10,000 citations. The question you should ask, just as you mentioned, is when did this person start working? So there is time for everything. When it's time for you to grow, the growth will certainly come. So the best thing is for you to keep on pushing, keep on making meaningful contribution to your field of study. And then before you know it, you see yourself succeeding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep looking.
I think Jonathan and I would say we were, of course, extremely lucky to be around Michael Halliday over a long period of time. Not only Michael Halliday, also Ruka Hassan, right? And that has been very helpful. And so again, I think, Peter, your point about mentorship, and I think how we create opportunities that maybe groups, they're not supported by any one institution or funding agency. But I do think that this is the SFL opportunity, thanks to its strength, that we have a great potential for supporting one another. I think it's been taken up to some extent, but I do think there is much more to this potential. The extraordinary activities around the world, the way that SFL has developed in Latin America over the last 20 years or so, I mean, it's extraordinary. And the strength we get from the Latin American communities, and now the way that Africa is coming together, and so on and so forth. If we can keep thinking together about how we form these groups, how we seed new developments that may take time, but will hopefully lead to contributions that would not otherwise happen. Striving certainly, but new forms of collaboration, new forms of collective mentorship, and so on.
No, I would just echo what Christian has said. And Christian, you had a much longer opportunity to engage with Professor Halliday for many years. Mine took place once I started working on it with Professor Halliday on the collected works, and I will treasure those hours spent at a conference table going over what he had done and hearing him speak, and then having an opportunity to engage with him and Professor Hassan over a meal and talking. I mean, that really was inspirational, and really it changed the course of my academic career, in the sense of being able to, and really career doesn't quite express it. I mean, it's an aspect of your life that meaningful relationship that transcended just academia and really gave insights to life. And I can't agree more with the importance of the important role that both Professor Halliday and Professor Hassan had in my life, and that is truly something to treasure. And I wish others could have had that opportunity. And it's so, but there are others out there that can be mentors, and a new generation you need to find those mentors that can help guide you and can help take you to the next level in terms of just your life and your career.
Yes, I don't know how many of you know the development of the collected works, Michael Hallett's collected works. I remember early on talking to him about this before Jonathan had become the choreographer of this project. And Michael was humbly thinking, well, maybe 3-4 volumes. And I remember then we had another conversation later, and he said, wow, Jonathan said, let's go for it. And that turned out to be 11 volumes. So I mean, I think it's important to relate to Eric's question. It is important to include in your goals very high ones that might seem to be unrealistic or visionary, right? Visionary goals. And that's part of the different timeframes. So I don't think Michael Hallett would ever have dared envisage 11 volumes of collected works. So that took the same kind of bravery as, taking that to the publisher and ignoring the dean, right? That's important. So you have to juggle these things.
Yeah, in fact, the publisher just took it immediately. Janet Joyce has been a very good friend to SFL, and
yes,
publishing began with Continuum and then over to Bloomsbury, and it's volume 11. Halliday in the 21st Century. I just attending this conference, as I mentioned, with Christine a few days ago, and the 11th volume has just been translated into Chinese. So it's great to see.
Fantastic. Congratulations. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Wester and Professor Matthiessen, for your insight and invaluable advice. I think there are lots of questions that we haven't had a chance to ask, but the time is limited. I was wondering if anyone had any pressing question that we'd like to continue now, or it's already 1 hour and 17 minutes. I'm happy to stay a bit longer. It's the final session for the conference, so it's so wonderful to meet all of you. So I'm still full of energy. So
it's getting late in Australia, at least East Coast time.
Yeah, but it's nearly it's Thursday now, not too bad. So anyone would like to ask anything?
So Isaac actually asked a couple of questions in the chat. So can I read it out for both of you?
Yes.
So he wonders how we can relate the eclecticism to the promotion of transdisciplinarity as one of the new virtues in academia research. So transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary research is currently highly valued, and most interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research often involve collaborations between people with different training. So this is question number 1. And question number 2, Isaac was wondering how we place the issue of eclecticism to the fact that SFL has taken in ideas from various strands of scholarship.
Well, that's part of evolution, isn't it? That as you develop and as you grow, you take on ideas and so forth. I think the point, I'll let Christian speak for himself, but I think he's made the point clear in terms of it's not at all discouraging a kind of interaction with other disciplines. And the connection with other disciplines can be very beneficial. I think it's a different point that Christian is making in terms of what does it mean to be eclectic, in the sense of just trying to perhaps connect SFL with another perhaps approach that may not in fact be something that can be merged together. But in any case, it's probably worth the try to see if the approach that is being used. I remember early on when Hudson came out with word grammar, And I was so interested in how that would relate to SFL and so forth. And it seemed very relevant to Lamb's approach of relational networks and so forth. But that sort of fell by the wayside, but it was interesting nonetheless to take a look. I don't think anything's discouraging that, but sometimes it isn't necessarily the truth, or the insight is not necessarily outside of one's own approach, and one can identify and be able to develop within SFL itself. I'm probably not clear on that point, but then it's time to turn over to Christian and ask him to clarify.
Okay, I absolutely agree, and being open and inquisitive and curious and greedy for insights from other strands in linguistics or other disciplines, I think is important. I don't think it's eclecticism. I mean, my alternative to eclecticism would partly be translate into systemic functional linguistics. That's what I would do in terms of insights. In terms of collaboration, say, across disciplines, what I found, and this goes back to the work within computational linguistics, where systemic functional linguistics was important, but there are also computational linguists, that people from AI, cognitive science, and so on. Here I found it useful to elaborate the one aspect of the modeling of the meta-language, the stratification of the meta-language in context, so that it was possible to locate where people, members of the team, could contribute. So the model that I found useful, partly coming from work on knowledge representation by Ron Brachman, but in any case, a sort of theoretical stratum, a stratum of theoretical representation. Now, these would still be within SFL, so theory of language and context and so on, theoretical forms of representation like system networks and realization statements. Then you move down, sort of lower strata, into computational forms of representations, like type feature structures, for example, production rules, not recommended, but in any case, these representational formalisms that have, or resources have been developed in computational linguistics, possibly AI, and then implementation in some programming language. And that was quite a useful model. It was also something we pursued in a project at Sydney University around the Norths, with John Patrick as the leader, becoming Professor of Information Science. Now, I would recommend trying to think this through, looking at the organization in its context. Obviously, one would need something of a different nature in educational linguistics, in healthcare communication studies, and so on and so forth. But I think it's very helpful to be able to stand back and sort of try to have a holistic, comprehensive map of where the contributions can be made. That I would recommend as a strategy. It relates partly to Ike's question about eclecticism in applied linguistics. So what I was saying about computational modeling, I wouldn't in a sense call that eclecticism, because it's really working on different regions, but related to different regional expertise coming from different disciplinary traditions. Applied linguistics, that would, I think, be a big discussion. That is, of course, one area where people tend to pick and choose different contributions. The one challenge is, of course, precisely to link the linguistics to pedagogy and so on. So we've had very interesting contributions there.
Thank you very much again, Professor Matthiessen and Professor Wester, and everyone for the contribution to the Roundtable today. Because of Rota now, it's 1.5 hours already. So I want to emphasize that it's a valuable opportunity to meet with Professor Matthiessen and Professor Wester. Actually, this is the first time ever for our conference and for SFLIG to have the opportunity to host this Roundtable and to have valuable guests today, Professor Wester and Professor Kristen and Matthiessen. So we would like to express our deep gratitude to both of you for spending your time providing advice and guidance, a lot of useful insight to all of us at Young SFL Scholar. And we are really grateful to your expertise and guidance, advice, and leaders in the community for such a long time. And we are, I'm sure we are all feeling lucky to meet you both today in this online environment, thanks to Zoom and to this online platform. So thank you so much, Professor Matthiessen and Professor Wester, for joining us and for having us at this conference. Once again, everyone, please let us thank Professor Matthiessen and Professor Wester for all the work they have done for us in our community. And thanks very much, everyone. Thanks all the center participants who have been extremely enthusiastic. You wake up so early in the morning, like up really like in the evening. Like Peter, he's still here from the this morning and until now. He attended almost all session. Marco, the cat, the lovely cat on the screen, and everybody. I can't name everyone. I see all familiar names here. So thank you so much for your support for the conference, and we hope that we have done something meaningful to the SFL community, and you'll gain a lot from this conference, and that will help you with your personal development and career advancement. And that's what Eric and I and all the organizing committee of SFLIG hope we can support in that way. And we will provide some updates after this conference. So please look at your inbox, especially email from Window with some updates about recording, etc. So and I believe the recordings will be updated. And if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. So you will get instant updates about recordings from SFLIG. That's the quickest way, I believe. Okay, thank you so much again, everyone. I don't want to leave now. Still want to longer.
A group picture together. So everyone, would you please?
The group picture. Have you got the Zoom background? I sent through the Zoom background this morning. Would anyone like to use it now for a group photo for the last session?
Stand by.
I can put it in the chat box now.
While we're waiting, Vin and Eric, thank you so much for putting all of this together. It's a great effort and a great accomplishment. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the time. It's our great pleasure. And we are very happy to see everyone in the conference, see your keenness, eagerness, and your smiling faces.
Okay, let's take one more.
So I just put
yeah, can you all look
at it's in the chat now. It's on its way.
Can we all look at the camera?
See it now. Can you see it now, everyone? It's in the chat.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, cheese.
It's in the chat box.
Okay. Yeah. Looking good. Looking done. So be careful when you walk, Lockie.
Yes. And there are 2 Lockies.
Yes.
We're lucky to have 2 Lockies. Yes.
I have been in Australia for 11 years. My first time meeting Kristen and Jonathan today. This is the first time ever, everyone. So if you are in Asia or Africa, then you can feel you lucky also, because even I'm in Australia, where SFL is really influence. And after 11 years in this field, this is my first time meeting true world leaders in SFL. So I feel very touched now.
Well, I'm delighted to meet you, and I'm sorry we missed one another in Spain. Vin and I were in Spain, overlapped in Spain, but about as far apart in Spain as you could get. And Spain is not a tiny country.
Oh, it's huge.
So,
and
it's
I
huge,
didn't have
yes.
time actually. Yeah. So I was at a conference. So and you were so far away from the conference. So yeah, but it's really good to meet online.
Yes.
Okay.
A lot can be done online. Yeah.
Thank you so much again, everyone. And hope to see you next time.
Yeah, keep in touch, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, enjoy your evening, enjoy your morning, afternoon, whatever the time of your place. Thank you so much, and
Thank
see
you,
you
yeah.
all.
Thanks.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Have a good
Thank
rest
you.
now.
Bye.
Yeah,
Thank
have a good rest.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.